In today's video, we will be exploring all of the types of dragons that live in Middle-earth.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Before we get going, guys, do not forget to smash that like button and leave us a comment discussing today's video. So in one of the great letters written by Professor Tolkien himself, this one in question, being to Miss Naomi Hutchinson, wrote, without any setup, about dragons. I find dragons a fascinating product of imagination, but I don't think the Beowulf one is frightfully good. But the whole problem of the intrusion of the dragon into northern imagination and its transformation there is one I do not know enough about. Fafnir in the late Norse versions of the Sigurd story is better, and Smaug and his conversation obviously is in depth there. The Letters of JRR Tolkien give a unique insight into the way he thought, and you will almost always find something relevant to a question you have about something within his greater legendarium, like how many dragon species were there? Were there more clans? Other kinds? Are there any persistent myths about what the legend does or does not say? The next letter was written around the year 1951, and we get some information on the quest of Erebor and what lies at its moral centre. But further still, we get a reply to specific questions and dragons beyond the time of Smaug and the quest of Erebor. Some stray answers. Dragons. They had not stopped since they were active in far later times, close to our own. Have I said anything to suggest the final ending of dragons? If so, it should be altered. The only passage I can think of is Volume 1, page 70. There is not now any dragon left on Earth in which the old fire is hot enough. But that implies, I think, that there are still dragons, if not of full primeval stature. As a feature in myth and legend the world over, it's no surprise that the modern father of fantasy should include dragons in his work and throughout the collective stories which now comprise the Legendarium, which itself refers to a collection of stories including but not limited to the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, and the anthology series The History of Middle-earth, which greatly expanded on the great process and evolution of Tolkien's stories into the forms we would finally receive, allowing us to understand so much more. Tolkien's earliest concept for the dragons used in his fiction was presented in the Book of Lost Tales 2, and from his letters we know that he was fascinated by the varying cultural depictions of dragons since his childhood. 4 dragons are named in his fiction, and like the inspiration he found from Norse mythology, Fafnir, Tolkien's dragons are intelligent, cunning, and can speak in a hypnotic fashion. Think of how Glaurung, the first of the dragons, though he could not fly, he was extremely dangerous because the way he caused people to go absolutely mad, able to twist their minds and drive them into suicide or murder, which we would argue is a more dangerous trait than throwing fire at a distant enemy. In the earliest draft of The Fall of Gondolin, Morgoth was said to send in mechanical war machines in the form of dragons, bearing orcs as transport vessels, an idea that was dropped from the published Silmarillion though. In the actual published version, real dragons attacked the city. At the same time, there were, as of yet, no winged dragons, as they had not yet been created or perverted into flying dragons, produced in the same age as Ancalagon the Black. By the Third Age's end, dragons bred in the northern wastes and in the withered heath north of the Grey Mountains. A bit of a fall from grace, it could potentially be said. The winged dragons first appeared in the War of Wrath, the battle which ended the First Age of Middle-earth. Dragons can be known as fire drakes, which of course means they breathe fire. Tolkien wrote in Appendix A, Part 3, Durin's Folk. It is said that after dwarfs fled Moria, away from the awoken Balrog, they made their way north. Some to Erebor, finding the Arkenstone, and some others went further, into the wasteland north of the Grey Mountains. But there were dragons in the wastes beyond, and after many years they became strong again and multiplied, and they made war on the dwarves and plundered their works. At least Dain the First, together with Fror, his second son, was slain at the doors of his hall by a great cold drake. The cold drakes have been taken to mean that these dragons could not breathe fire, but ice instead, also being said to have been bred by the Dark Lord Morgoth in the First Age. These could be used in terrifying ways, although we have yet to see their usage in the plot of the main stories. One of the characteristics of Dragonfire, particularly that of Ancalagon the Black, was that it was hot enough to consume rings of power, with it being stated 4 of the dwarven rings were destroyed in this way. However, their fires were not hot enough to melt the One Ring. A characteristic that pervades each of Tolkien's dragons is a love of treasure and hoarding it, a subtle and nuanced intelligence embodied by great physical strength and the dragon spell. Each is extremely dangerous, but they mature slowly, and Melkor failed in his first attempt to use them against his enemies in battle, as they were not yet powerful enough to be used in combat. As stated, there were only 4 named dragons in Tolkien's writings, and of them we will speak of individually. Glaurung. He was first mentioned in the Silmarillion, described as the father of dragons within the Legendarium, and the first of the fire dragons of Angband. He is also the main antagonist of the Children of Húrin story, an expansion of the condensed story that was found within the published Silmarillion. In that story, he puts into place a series of events that will lead eventually to the suicide of Turin Turambar before Glaurung himself is killed. Glaurung is shown to be able to use his mind to control and enslave people. He erased the memory of Turin's sister, Nienor, though she was restored to sanity after Glaurung's death. He is the Great Worm, 4-legged, fire-breathing but wingless. What that does not mean is that he is not dangerous. A dragon need not be able to fly to cause mass destruction. Ancalagon the Black. The most popular dragon after Glaurung has to be Ancalagon the Black, which comes from the Sindarian words for rushing jaws and unrestrained. Ancalagon was a dragon bred by Morgoth during the First Age, and was one of the most powerful servants of Morgoth. Raised as the greatest and most powerful dragon ever created, the first of the winged fire drakes. He rose out of Angband like a storm of wind and fire from the hellholes of Angband under the Iron Mountains, as the last defense of Dor Daedaloth, the land of Morgoth in the First Age. At the culmination of the War of Wrath, when the host of Morgoth ran into the forces of the Valar, Ancalagon was sent to lead a fleet of winged dragons against the Valar, and the attack was so fierce that the host of the Valar was thrown back from the gates of Angband. Eärendil took to the sky on Vingilot, his magical flying elvish ship, along with Throndur and the great eagles of Manwë, and they did fight mightily against Ancalagon and his dragons, all through the day and night. But in the end, Eärendil was victorious, and he and his eagles threw down Ancalagon onto the 3-headed towers of Thangorodrim, which destroyed Ancalagon and the towers of Thangorodrim. With his most powerful agent destroyed, Morgoth was soon defeated and captured, bringing the War of Wrath and the First Age to an end. Scatha. Scatha was a mighty flightless dragon of the Grey Mountains. Little is actually known about him other than he was killed by Fram in the early days of the assembled peoples of Eorl in the Eotheod. Scatha's name is presumed to be related to the term to scathe, which can mean things like cause damage, harm, or even murder. As a philologist, Tolkien would of course be aware of all these references. After Scatha's murder, the dwarves disputed Fram's ownership of the restored hoard, picked up from the now abandoned hoard that Scatha was too dead to continue guarding. Fram rejected the dwarven claim and instead sent him a necklace of Scatha's teeth, teasing him with the following: "Jewels such as these you will not find in your treasures, because they are difficult to get." This led to Fram's death. The Eotheod kept at least a part of the hoard, taking it south when the Eolinga settled in Rohan. At the end of the War of the Ring, Eomer and Eowyn gave Meriadoc Brandybuck a horn, which was used during the Scouring of the Shire chapter in the Battle of the Bywater, and it's likely that this treasure came from the hoard of Scatha itself. Smaug. The last named dragon in Middle-earth, Smaug, the one killed by Bard the Bowman, descendant of Girion, Lord of Dale. As a deadly fire-breathing dragon, he was subtle in mind and speech, and even capable of noticing if a single trinket was stolen from his hoard. He has some notion of what the market price is for each of his pieces of treasure in the neighbouring dale, implying that he has a sense of how valuable the individual pieces are, though he intends to hoard and keep the treasure rather than make any use of it. He was described as red gold in marking, his underbelly encrusted with many gems. The Arkenstone was buried right in the pile he was sleeping on at one point, and Smaug didn't even notice. The one weakness given to Smaug the dragon was the video game style soft spot under his belly, near the area of his left breast. Bilbo Baggins discovered this, a thrush of course passed on the message, and so the death of the last great fire drake of Middle-earth came over Askaroth. So there we have it, a look into the dragons of Tolkien's works. They have come from Angband, the Northern Waste, Nargothrond, and more. These terrifying creatures fit so well in any mythological world, and none any more than Middle-earth. These creatures, also known as the Great Worms, came in the form of fire drakes, cold drakes, long worms, and sea serpents. Each and every one of them would be cunning, malicious, and all-around terrifying creatures to come up against. There were said to be several dragons during the First Age, and although some still survived by the times of the War of the Ring, their numbers were far fewer than at their greatest power. Although Smaug is seen as deadly and iconic, we must remember, if he were to be compared to the likes of Ancalagon the Black, he would be childish in comparison. Not to say even the smallest dragon would be any simple task to take down. With that though, now is time for our question of the day, which is, what is your favourite of Tolkien's dragons, and why? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Now time of course has come to shout out our Patreons. You guys are supporting our short film project, The Guard. We are making really good progress. We're currently looking for a cinematographer, so if anybody knows someone, send them our way. We have the Divine Power tier members of Kevin and Abraham, the Fire Demon tier members of Nashith and Gregory, and the Wizard Staff tier members John, Andrew, Jennifer, Hunter, and David. You are all true legends of the Bro Hiram. Finally, if you've managed to reach the end of this video with me today and you have enjoyed what you've heard, then please consider hitting that subscribe button and bell icon with notifications ticked so that you don't miss out on any future uploads. Thank you all so much for listening to me today. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.